Hello, this is Ruslan Belov. We continue to analyze the situation on the front. The truce has ended, and hostilities have resumed with full force. Let's open the map. So friends, we're back with you to break down the situation on the front lines. And I want to start with the older regions, namely Kursk oblast. Here the end is truly within arm's reach. Even before the Easter truce, our fighters had liberated the village of Oleshnya. This village is located right on the border of Sumy Oblast. The battles for it were long and fierce, precisely because the village sits right on the border, and the Ukrainian armed forces constantly tried to funnel reserves into it. Yes, most of these reserves were destroyed on approach, but occasionally 2 or 3 fighters managed to slip in and continued trying to hold basements, houses, and so on. But, as always happens, the final victory was still ours. The village has been liberated and has returned home. Additionally, alongside the liberation of Oleshnya, we managed to enter the residential part of the village of Gornyal. Thus, at this current moment, the UAF retains only partial control over one village, Gornyal, and that's it. They control nothing else in Kursk Oblast. Regarding the truce, even though it did not apply to our older regions, and fighting continued here yesterday, the intensity was still lower than on regular days. That is, there was no progress yesterday, but today there are already reports that the fighting has resumed, with renewed, let's say, ferocity. And considering that the UAF now controls almost nothing in Kursk Oblast, I believe we can soon expect news of the complete liberation of Kursk Oblast. To achieve this, we need to take Gornyal, plus a number of forest plantations, and then all the land of Kursk Oblast will return home. You know how it usually goes. The UAF entered, yes, at their peak they occupied over 1,000 square kilometers, but in the end, attention goes to the final result. And what is the result now? Right now, they control about 5 square kilometers of Kursk Oblast. And of course, very soon, nothing will remain of these 5 square kilometers. That is, the final outcome of the Kursk battle for the UAF is 0. Though I'd even say it's a negative value, because in Sumy Oblast, they have now lost over 70 square kilometers. Now, regarding Belgorod Oblast, the geography here remains unchanged. The villages of Demidovka and Popovka are under our control. Although, by the way, yesterday during the truce, the UAF tried, taking advantage of the silence of artillery and aviation, since neither was operating, to launch a counterattack here. But our scouts saw everything perfectly, let them approach the dragon's teeth on the border, and then dismantled them right there. 6 UAF soldiers became 200s, killed, 3 more were 300s, wounded, and later UAF troops came under a white flag to retrieve them. In short, Zelensky, true to form, cries about the evil Russians violating agreements while sending his men into a deadly and senseless attack, the outcome of which is clear. And this happens constantly. Now back to the Azov units. I mean the Lyman direction. The situation for them remains as grim as ever. The truce did nothing to improve their positions here. They lost another village, Mirolyubivka. Here, in fact, is Mirolyubivka, and as you can see, it is under our full and indisputable control. And today, after the truce, our guys have resumed assault operations. From the village, they are trying to advance further. That's point 1. Plus, fighting continues in the residential area of the village of Novoye. And the battles there are brutal. I posted footage of dead Azov fighters on my Telegram channel. And it's not just photos, it's video. You can follow the link in the description and watch the clip. Moreover, I'll tell you that fighting is not only happening in Novoye and to the north, but they've already practically reached another village. This one here, the village of Redkodub. A good result, I must say. And the key thing is that it continues. Well, except for the Easter truce, on a daily basis. The Azov fighters, no matter how elite they claim to be, and we've already discussed this, are completely failing. And over the past 2 weeks, they've lost more than 6 kilometers on this section of the front. As for the Siversk direction, yesterday during the truce, the UAF tried to organize a counterattack here. But again, as was the case in Belgorod Oblast, our forces saw everything perfectly, so all attempts were repelled, and the line of contact remains unchanged at this moment. Regarding Toretsk, yesterday Zelensky had a complete meltdown over this. He even said in his address something like, "Look how evil the Russians are. What scumbags. They set up an ambush and killed poor UAF soldiers." This happened, by the way, in this sector near Lyman. But Zelensky forgot to mention one crucial detail. I'd even say a critical one. The nuance is that this wasn't a UAF group with a white flag trying to evacuate, say, the severely wounded or recover the bodies of those who had died earlier. This was a UAF group that, exploiting the truce, tried to seize the grey zone. You see, this area here is a grey zone. Neither the UAF nor our forces control it. And during the truce, they moved into these positions thinking they were smarter than everyone else, that they could take advantage of the ceasefire. No artillery, no aviation, nothing firing, to move in and stay. That way, the grey zone would no longer be no man's land. It would become UAF-controlled territory. But of course, no one allowed that. So yes, they all ended up as 200s, killed. And yesterday, Zelensky had a panic attack, a full-blown tantrum. He screamed, "Look how horrible the Russians are. They asked for a truce, but then ambushed and slaughtered our soldiers. Well, if those soldiers had just stayed put, they'd still be alive. But their command decided to outsmart everyone, and in the end, soldiers died who shouldn't have, because there was a truce." What else about Toretsk? You can see here, fresh updates indicate advances in this sector. The clearing of this pocket west of Toretsk is underway, and fighting is happening near Sukha-Balka, though, honestly, the situation there is practically decided. I think today you'll hear that Sukha-Balka has come under our army's control. The UAF is clinging only to the northernmost houses, but they won't hold for long. They'll have to fall back, and far back, because as you can see, there's empty space all the way to the outskirts of Toretsk, Petrivka, and Sherbinivka. Regarding Mirolyubivka, here's something very important. Even before the truce began, our soldiers not only took the southern part of the village, but pushed all the way to its center. Remember, I told you about that attack involving nearly 100 motorcycles? Well, it was a success. The southern part was secured, and from there they advanced to the center. Now that fighting has resumed, expect news from Mirolyubivka soon. I think movement will push from the center toward the northern outskirts. And what happens after Mirolyubivka is taken? The next objective is Novoekonomikny, a town that currently helps the UAF hold back attacks on Mirnograd from the east. But if Novoekonomikny falls, Mirnograd will be completely cut off from that direction. Anyway, we'll keep watching how this develops. Other frontline updates: Novopavlivka direction, Russian forces from the Vostok Group are pushing toward Oradne and Bohatyr. Even before the Easter truce, the Russian army had effectively encircled Vovchapol from the north and south, clearing 3 forest belts and capturing 2 strongpoints. Central Group sector. No changes here. Before the truce, flanks were being consolidated near Troitsky and Kotlyarivka. Generally, they're now positioned well enough to advance further toward Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Pokrovsk direction. Units of the Center Group have resumed their offensive on Pokrovsk, attacking the outskirts of Mirolyubivka from Novotoretsk. The UAF has been hitting the area all day with drones and mortars. Chasiv Yar direction. Unusual quiet here. For the first time since 2022, there have been no strikes on Artemivsk, Bakhmut. Siversk direction. After several hours of calm, the UAF launched a small group attack on Russian positions near Bilohorivka. The attempt was repelled. Krasnohorivka, Lyman. Direction. The Russian MOD confirmed control over Novomikhailivka, secured before the Easter truce. Evacuations of wounded were reported near Yampolivka and Bilohorivka. Kupiansk direction. Multiple sources report a failed UAF counteroffensive. Russian forces neutralized much of the UAF's armored vehicles. Reports indicate that Russian Guards units from the Zapad Group have been repelling attacks by UAF elite GUR assault troops since Friday night. The counterattack failed, with Russian electronic warfare EAW systems playing a key role. Kharkiv sector, Vovchansk. UAF artillery remains active, though with reduced intensity. Additionally, a UAF brigade has relocated at least one Toshka-U missile system from Dnipropetrovsk to Kharkiv Oblast, likely preparing for strikes on Russian border areas. Zaporizhia direction. Russian paratroopers and motorized infantry are breaking through UAF defenses in brutal fighting, advancing near Shcherbaki and Orakovo. The Russian army is seizing ground step by step, having entered Malotokmachka and consolidating near Novodanilivka. Additional political note: our sources report that Trump, through intermediaries, twice dissuaded Putin from using tactical nuclear strikes, Oreshkin, against Ukraine this year, despite Zelensky's provocations via Telegram channel Legitimny. However, the Kremlin has reportedly already prepared target lists for potential strikes if necessary. The strike will be carried out as soon as the Ukrainian crisis escalates and Trump is out of the picture. According to forecasts, this will happen in May-June. Our sources indicate that the target lists include ports, factories, major industrial facilities, energy and gas infrastructure, railway hubs and related infrastructure, key bridges, tunnels, military bases, airfields, government institutions, and decision-making centers. It is also reported that Andriy Yermak has reached an agreement with British intelligence on the transfer of a new batch of long-range missiles to Ukraine and has received assurances from Germany's new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, regarding increased military aid. Merz has promised to deliver 300 Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine by summer, as well as new air defense systems and missiles for them. Yermak raised the issue of frozen Russian assets with the US Secretary of State, requesting their transfer for Ukraine's reconstruction, but was met with a categorical refusal. Marco Rubio stated that the US supports lifting sanctions and unfreezing all Russian assets as part of a deal to peacefully resolve the conflict in Ukraine. Moscow accuses Kiev of violating Easter ceasefire. Moscow has accused Ukraine of violating the Easter truce, claiming that attacks using HIMARS systems continued. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova made the statement in response to the US State Department's call to extend the ceasefire after Easter. She emphasized that any extension of the truce is in doubt precisely because of Kiev's actions, which, despite agreements, continued hostilities. Earlier, Zelensky had proposed extending the ceasefire for 30 days after Easter, but later narrowed the initiative to a ban on long-range strikes. The Kremlin, however, stressed that Vladimir Putin has not issued any orders to extend the truce. There will be no further ceasefires, regardless of the reasons for their collapse, adds Legitimny. It's important to understand that as long as the Kremlin does not get sanctions lifted and its other demands met, there will be no truces. We advise preparing for the opposite. After the ceasefire ends, massive strikes will intensify as missile and drone stockpiles grow, production capacity increases, and offensive operations gain urgency. US delegation heads to London for ceasefire talks. Next week, an American delegation will travel to London to negotiate a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg announced this on Fox News, stating, "We are working on a potential truce and will return to London next week to finalize it." Kellogg clarified that by a comprehensive ceasefire, he means a halt to fighting on land, in the air, and at sea. Additionally, it should include protections for energy infrastructure, followed by a longer-term peace agreement. "I think we are on the right track," he said. Closing remarks. That's all for today's Frontline update. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this report.